What's up, Shepherd Youth? Yeah. I was actually expecting you to be like, and then I was going to have to tell you again, like, what's up? But that was actually pretty good, so I'll take that. My name is Jeff, and I am super excited to be here with you guys this morning. And usually I'm up here leading worship, but today, my friend Dusty has asked me to come and wrap up our series called Trust Fall. And 2 ground rules before we start. If you can you please, number 1, try not to be on your cell phone. I would really appreciate that. Ironically, if you're on your cell phone, I could see it because the screen like lights up your face. You have beautiful faces, but I don't want to see it off your cell phone. Number 2, try not to potty. If you can avoid it, try not to go to the bathroom during this time, right? Unless you really feel like you have to use the bathroom and you're going to pee on yourself, #Adri, then go if you need to. But otherwise, please try to hold it. Is that cool? Can we do that? So yeah, we're in the last week of Trust Fall, and a couple weeks ago, the lovely Brianne Bookout started us off there, and my favorite part of her message 2 weeks ago, you guys remember what she talked about? Anybody? Yesterday, some girl on the phone was like, no. I said, okay. She talked about Peter, about walking on water, and she gave an example during her message about my son Nolan, and like when babies are first trying to walk, and they look like they're drunk, so they're like walking like this. But I got a takeaway from her message that I thought is a good reminder for us today, and that was that Jesus, if it'll be up there, nope, that's the wrong one. That is not what I needed. Jesus stretches out his hand when we fail to trust, right? And then last week, my man Sean O'Don continued that series for us in Trust Fall, and he talked about leaning on what you know. And something that I thought was great about his message was that it's okay to have doubts, but it's what you do with your doubts that matter. Cool? And so today we're going to continue to move into this idea of failure and the idea of failing forward, which you don't usually see those 2 words together. If you fail, it's just a fail, right? But usually people aren't like, hey, you fail forward, like it's a good thing. No. So I'm going to give you guys an example of my life when perhaps I had one of my greatest fails, right? And it is ironic that when we see fails, like why do we watch fail videos? You guys watch fail videos? They're funny, right? Who's the one person that's not funny to? The person who's failing, right? So in my life, and I'll set it up this way, I am on a date, all right? It's a few years ago, it's years back. I'm on a date. And just for any of you guys who are not dating yet and who are at some point in time, there's like casual dates, like, let's get some coffee. Okay, let's do that. Hey, there's this new donut shop. Let's go get some donuts. Cool. This was a serious date, right? I make reservations. I'll call down to the Macaroni Grill in Northridge, really fancy place. Not really that fancy, but it was fancy at the time. And I was like, girl, just get something nice on, do your hair, get your nails done, whatever. And so we are at this fancy restaurant on a date. And sometimes when you are, a little bit nervous and you're on something like a date, you get something that happens inside of your body, usually in your stomach area. And then sometimes people call it like the nervous poops, right? You have a nervous poop moment. And I am literally going into this date with a nervous poop moment. So we sit down and everything's cool. And I'm like, hey, girl, just, they got the paper there. Just go ahead and crayon your way all on that paper. And I'm just going to go ahead and use the bathroom real quick. And I was just honest. I said, hey, I got to poop. I feel like if the date can go on from there, then why won't it work out, right? So I go to the bathroom, and I'm like walking to the bathroom, and I'm like thinking about the things I'm going to say that I'm just going to like win her over. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to talk about her eyes and her teeth and stuff. And then I was like, I go into the bathroom, and I'm like, cool. Check myself in the mirror, good, get into the stall. I'm like, sit down, here we are. So I start pooping, obviously, because that's what you do. And I'm just like, man, I can't wait to say that, and then that's going to be good. And she's going to be so happy that I said that. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like sitting there taking a poop. And like in the bathroom, you could hear like, it's cool. Like they teach you Italian. So there's like a woman's voice, no big deal. She's teaching you Italian. I'm like, oh, that's nice. The girl voice, whatever. And then a couple minutes later, I hear what sounds like women's high heels, right? It just sounds like women's high heels. So I'm like, dude, that guy's boots are interesting, right? And so I'm like, all right, whatever, I'm still pooping. And then all of a sudden, the lady in the bathroom starts talking on her cell phone. Guys, I am pooping in the woman's bathroom at Macaroni Grill in Northridge. Like, I'm full on in poop, too. Like, I'm not like I'm just starting to have time to save this. No, I'm pooping the whole time, right? Anyway, I'm sitting there, and I'm like, okay, I do what anybody else would do. What would you do in that moment? Like, I put my feet on the door to try to hide. I'm like, I don't want to know that I'm in here. So I, like, put my feet on the door. Hey, stay as long as you can. No, that's not what I wanted to do. So I literally, finally, she leaves, and I'm like, cool. I get up as fast as I can, and right when I walk out, so I walk out of the stall, and as I walk out, there's another lady in there, and she works at Macaroni Grill. And she's sitting there with her hair done, and she's like doing a pony in her hair. And she's just like looking at me like this. And I'm standing back behind her. I was like, and I'm like, this is the women's bathroom. That's what I said. And she's like, uh-huh. I was like, I'm so sorry. I like washed my hands and I ran out, right? That was probably the fastest meal I've ever eaten in my entire life. The fastest meal, and I ate really fast. Anyway, guys, we're not here to talk about my failures, but I will have you know, and if I'm honest, girls in the room, I know you're thinking right now, like some of the girls in the back are probably like, girl, if he pooped on a date with me, that is the last date I will ever go on with him. No chance. Bye, boy. Bye. And some of the guys in the room are like, dude, you like doo-doo on a date? And thank you, Preston. And I will gladly stand here and tell you, yes, I did. I pooped in the women's bathroom on a date. And it just so happens that my poopy nightmare of a failure turned out into something great moving forward into this. Yeah. Woo! God is so good, even though you poop in a women's bathroom. And so, guys, if you're wondering how to find your future wife, you need to take her on a date and poop in the women's bathroom. Don't ever do that. Trust me, it is not fun. Anyway, guys, we're not here to talk about my failures, although they're fun to listen to and they're very embarrassing for me. We are here to talk about Peter and his failures. And so before we start again, I encourage you guys, we say it all the time here at Shepherd Youth, we get like a small period of time, right, to talk about these things in the Bible. And so we encourage you guys when you leave here throughout the week, we're going to be in John 18 and John 21. And so when you get a chance to open it up for yourself later on, remind yourself of these stories, okay? So we're talking about Peter, and before we talk about Peter, we're talking about failure. And so I wrote down, let's define failure. So failure can be defined as, number one, a lack of success, or number two, the omission or neglecting of expected or required action. And you can put a third one there. Fail is a really embarrassing moment in your life, right? Because that's what happened to me. And so in the life of Peter, we look at John 18. And just to catch you up to this point in John 18, if you read through the Gospels, guys, Peter is like, there's the 12 disciples, right? But then Peter, along with James and John, there's 3 disciples that seem like they're in this inner circle with Jesus, a little bit closer to Jesus, right? And so Peter's one of these 3 in the inner circle. And examples of that, you can look at it on yourself. If you want to write it down, that's cool too. In Mark 5, there's a part where Jesus only takes Peter, James, and John into a house where he brings a little girl from death back to life. Only those 3, right? And then in Matthew 17, there's something called the Transfiguration, where Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up to a mountain where he reveals his full glory, right? He only takes Peter, James, and John. And then in Matthew 26, it's the night before Jesus is crucified, and he takes who? Peter, James, and John into the garden where he prays. So there's this idea that Peter is not just like an average guy, and again, not that the disciples were just all average guys, but Peter and Jesus were like homies. Like, you all have homies, right? You guys got day ones? Anybody got day ones in here? You guys know what a day one is? What is a day one? A friend that you've had for a very, 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 very long time, right? And there's a meaningful friendship there, right? So I got my day ones, like the guys at my wedding, day ones. Peter was Jesus' day one. Like literally Jesus, like Peter was one of the first disciples that Jesus called. He literally a day one. And again, in John 18, Jesus has already been arrested. He's already gotten betrayed by Judas with a kiss, right? And as Jesus is getting arrested, Peter's like slicing dudes' ears off, if you guys read it, right? And like, can we just, like, I'm going to pause for a second. Like, Peter is the epitome of somebody who was just extra. Like, all the time. Like, if you read about Peter, he is so extra. Like, Jesus, he just told the disciples, yo, I'm going to get arrested. Right? And everybody was like, oh, no. And then when it happens, Peter pulls out a sword and is like slicing dudes' ears off. I feel like it's a little bit extra, right? And then earlier I talked about Matthew 17 when they go to the mountain. And guys, the transfiguration, Jesus is showing them his full glory. Peter, James, and John, right? James and John are doing what we would probably do, right? Like he's showing them his glory and they're just like, I don't know what to do in that situation, but Peter, Mr. Extra himself, this is what Peter does. And this is paraphrase, but he literally, instead of like being in awe of what Jesus is doing, he's like, hey, yo, Jesus, yeah, it's tight, man. Hey, this is dope. Can I just like build a tent? And I'll make some food, man. We'll just stay here forever. Like Moses is showing up. Like we can just kick it, man. Like, right? And then if you read it in Matthew 17, it says, while Peter is still talking, God himself comes through the clouds and says, Peter, shut up. This is my son. Listen to him. Peter is Mr. Extra himself. And then Brianne a couple of weeks talked about him walking on water, right? They didn't like really write it in there, but how it really went down was the storm was raging and they were in the boat and the disciples were all scared. And Peter was like, swimming is so basic. I'm about to walk on this water. And then he just started walking on water, right? That's what he did. I mean, don't quote me on that. Right? So Peter is Mr. Extra himself. Anyway, here we are. We are at John 18, and we're going to read it together. Verse 15 says, Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus because this disciple was known to the high priest. He went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. Verse 16 says, but Peter had to wait outside the door. The other disciple who was known to the high priest came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. Verse 17, she says, you aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you? She asked Peter. He replied, I am not. Denial number one. Moments later, in verse 25, it says, meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself, so they asked him, you aren't one of his disciples too, are you? He denied it. I am not. Denial number two. Verse 26, one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter cut off, challenged him. He's like, yo, man, you cut my homie's ear off. I know you. And it says right here in verse 26, 27, again, Peter denied it, and at that moment, denied it, number three, and at that moment, a rooster began to crow. At that moment, a rooster began to crow, and at that moment, guys, at that moment, Peter like almost had like that oh no moment. He remembered back in John 13, Jesus is talking to Peter, and he asked Peter, Peter, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you that the rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. I know, right? And so in that moment, guys, Peter, in that moment when he said, no, I don't know Jesus. No, I don't know him. No, I don't know that man. In that moment, he realizes what he's done, and that was a fail, right? And in that moment, Peter endures a huge moment of failure and regrets. And so in your notes, we wrote this down. The first part of your notes there, it says, failures can cause us to regret. Right? When we fail, we feel regret. It's very common. Right? The next part says, a life with Jesus, the life that we here at Shepherd Youth are always encouraging you to pursue, a life with Jesus allows us to turn regrets into, what does that say? Reminders, right? And then moving forward, failures turn into reminders, and reminders are catalysts that have the power to propel us forward. Reminders are catalysts that have the power to propel us forward and propel us forward into a life that Jesus is calling us to live, guys. Reminders help propel us forward. Guys, reminders are powerful. They are. Regret keeps us in the funk of our failure, while reminders keep our focus fresh, right? And here at church, we've been singing it for a few months. And one of my favorite songs that we've been able to sing over the past few months is a song called Do It Again, right? And it's, guys, it's literally a reminder. Like the song is, a lot of these songs we sing are reminders, right? But that one straight up says in the bridge, God, I've seen you move. You move the mountains. And I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way. In my failures, in those moments, you made a way when there was no way. And I believe that I'll see you do it again, right? Those are great songs of reminders. And so for you guys, I encourage you guys to choose. You have to make a choice, guys, to see regret. That's a mindset, right? Regret and reminders, right? Next time regret comes in, just be like, what's up, regret? It's a new mind. Who this? Right? It's a new you. Don't think about regret anymore. Think about reminders, guys. So I encourage you guys to do that. Maybe it's through reading the Bible. Maybe it's through singing these songs. Right? So again, we talk about Peter and his failures, and it's about the mistakes that he's made in the past. So we need to talk about him moving forward. The question is, when does Peter find the forward part in his life? And so we'll read about it. And again, we're moving to John 21. So we're skipping a little bit there between 18 and 21. And in that time, Jesus has now resurrected and has proven to be the Savior of the world. Right? And now he's revealing himself to people here, and he's revealing himself to people here, and he's talking to people. People are touching his wounds, right? But he's proven that he's the Savior of the world. And so the disciples are in this season, this little moment of, well, now what? What do we do now? Because it's been leading up to this, and now we don't know what to do. And so Peter, he just goes back to what he knows. Do you guys remember what Peter was doing before he was a disciple? Anybody? He was a fisherman, right? And so he just says, you know what? I'm going to go back to what I know, right? And so here we are in John 21, verses 3 through 9. Verse 3 says, Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. And they said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Verse 4 says, just as day was breaking, which means they were fishing all night and caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood at the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? And they answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. And so they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. And then in verse 7 says, that disciple whom Jesus loved, which is John, therefore said to Peter, it's Jesus! I don't know if he yelled like that. He had like that elf moment when he saw Santa for the first time. Jesus! Like that's what he said. Like he finally realized that it was Jesus, right? And then it says in verse 7, when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea, right? Like he said, it's Jesus. I know that now, so now I'm going to jump in and get to him. He was in a boat, right? And verse 8 says, the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off, which tells you what? How far did Peter swim? A football field, right? Walking a football field ain't that bad. Running it, even easier. But swimming a football field, crazy, right? And then verse 9, it says, when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Fish and fire, right? And so 3 things to learn about this passage, guys, that I wrote down, which won't be in your notes, but listen up. Guys, in the situation of the disciples throwing their nets out again, it's a cliche thing that we hear all the time, and people say it. Usually adults will tell you this too. And they say, hey, If at first you don't succeed, you should what? Try again. And it's so true, guys. It's so true. And in our life, when we fail, when we make mistakes, we beat ourselves up. We beat ourselves up. So much so to the point that we drown out the advice and the person that's telling us, hey, it's okay. Get up. Try again. So I encourage you guys to not do that. Don't do that. Remind yourself, it's okay. Get up and try again. And then number 2, this idea of Peter swimming to Jesus, right? Which is crazy. Again, fishing back then, guys, is not like fishing how you see it now, like in shows or like on commercials where there's a dude just like sitting out in a boat and the sun's all setting and he's just chilling with like a single rod out there, like whistling. That's not how fishing was back then, guys. Fishing back then, they had huge, heavy nets, right, that they would now toss out, and then they drag that net back in hopes to catch fish, which in this case they caught none. Then they pull the net, which is heavier now because of the water, back into the boat just so they can throw it out again. And they did this all night long. And so Peter, it says he put his outer garment back on because he was tired, like he was sweaty and smelly. Fish does not smell good. You guys ever been to like a fish market and you're like, ooh, I don't think I want fish anymore, right? Fish does not smell good. So Peter was smelly and tired and sweaty, and still he swam to Jesus. He did not care. And so I encourage you guys in your life, when you have these moments of how you feel like you're making mistakes, you feel like your smell, the sin that you try to hide and tuck away that we don't want people to know about, with Jesus, it doesn't matter. Peter didn't care. And so for you guys, I encourage you to just dive out there. Get out there. Get to Jesus. By any means, get to Jesus. All right? And that part actually reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from my friend Dory, who says, just keep swimming, right? Just keep swimming, guys. And then the last part of that passage, guys, in that story, in that passage about the disciples and Jesus telling them about the boat, the disciples had to listen to some advice. And the advice was simple. It was, go to the other side of the boat. But the disciples had to listen, and they had to take that advice and go to the other side of the boat to get change in their life, to see something change. And so for you guys here at Shepherd Youth, every single weekend, we give you the other side of the boat. That's not a boat there. It's a Shepherd Youth sign and everything, right? But the concept of next steps, guys, is literally the other side of the boat, where we give you guys opportunities to come with your failures. You weren't catching anything, right, like the disciples. And we allow you to come to these adult leaders in the room that are here for you. They're not here for me. They're here for you guys. So I encourage you guys to utilize that. Utilize that other side of the boat here at Shepherd Youth every weekend in Next Steps and go talk to someone, right? Again, back to your notes. We are, there's 2 titles there. It says Fish and Fire, and this is in reference to verse 9 there. And real quick, just the idea of fish in this moment. Fish reminds us that fish equals Jesus wants us to dine with him, which means that Jesus wants us to what? Spend time with him. That's right. How do we spend time with Jesus, guys? Praying. What else? Worshiping. What else? Trusting him, right? Going to church. You're here right now. You're spending time with Jesus, right? When we get together and we worship together and we learn together, we're worshiping Jesus. Because we're telling everything outside of these 4 walls, everything in the world, hey, hold up. It's time for me and Jesus. All right? Let's do that. Okay? And the second part is fire. And fire equals light. And light reveals things, right? When you're looking for something, you turn the light on, it's easier to see it. And guys, everything changes when the light comes on. A few weeks back, I was here for a D group night, and I left around 9 o'clock. It was like 9:30-ish when I got home. And my wife's out watering the plants, and our son was asleep. And on the baby monitor, it looked like he was asleep. And then so I go to the front door, and from the front door to the back of the house, I could hear Nolan crying, right? And I'm like, oh, man, he's crying. And so I walk down the hallway all the way to the back, and as I go into the bedroom, in the dark, I could see this little boy, little baby, sitting in the middle of our bed, and he's crying. And he sees a much larger figure, me, standing in the doorway, but he doesn't know because it's dark. So I'm like, he doesn't know it's me. So I turn on the light, and there's literal tears. And in a second, guys, the second the light turned on, tears turn into smiles, and he reached his arms out. Right? I think that's a really, really sweet reminder of how it works when Jesus is revealed in our lives and we spend time with him and we bring him those dark moments. He turns the light on, brings the fire, and we can now reach out. Right? So we're going to continue. Again, this last part that we're going to read together in John 21 is this moment that I think propels Peter forward into the forward part of his life. And in John 21, verses 15 through 17, we'll read it. It says, when they had finished eating, so they were already there eating with Jesus, it said, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. And then Jesus said, feed my sheep. That's one. In verse 16, again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. Number two. And the third time, in verse 17, the third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know I love you. You know all things. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. And it's not, for me, it's not ironic that Jesus asked him how many times? 3 times, right? How many times did Peter deny Jesus? 3 times. And so he takes his denials, he takes his failures, right? And what Jesus does in this moment, guys, is he takes Peter's failures and those doubts and all those things that he did, and he exchanges it with love. He conquers the failures with love. And then he doesn't stop there. What he does is he takes that, and then he gives Peter what? A purpose and a calling by telling him what? Feed my sheep. That's what Jesus does, guys. He takes our failures, he takes all the things that we do, all the funky things that we bring to him. He takes them, he loves us and reminds us of our love for him, and then he exchanges those things with calling and a purpose in our life. And guys, he's done it. I'm a living example. He has done that for me time and time again. And if you talk to any of the adult leaders in here, they will tell you of the many times that Jesus has done that for them. And part of that process is why they're here. Adult leaders are here because they felt like Jesus has given them that call and that purpose to serve you, right? And then again, in the Bible, if you guys read, there's plenty of examples like this, guys. You guys know Moses, right? We talk about Moses all the time. If you talk about the life of Moses, it was a failure, right? Like leading up to what he actually ended up doing, right? For starters, he was a baby, and they just kind of threw him in a basket in the water. Like that it's so close to an abortion, basically, because he didn't know what was going to happen to him. And so that seemed like a fail. And then once Moses was older, he killed a guard. So he killed someone, fail. Then he fled as a fugitive, fail. He had a stuttering problem, fail. And then what happened? What did God do? God took Moses, sent him back to Egypt to deliver God's people from slavery, right? And then he was used by God to split a sea wide open so that God's people can move what? Forward, thank you. Right? And then we talk about Paul, who wrote most of the Bible, most of the New Testament, right? Paul, who previously was who? Saul. And what did Saul do? He was killing Christians, man. Like, how? Dude, Paul put the L in fail, right? Like, he took an L, and then he bounced back and wrote some of the dopest scripture that we'll ever read in our lives. Ever. Because God is that good, right? And then in the case for Peter, guys, it's no different with Peter. He denied Jesus, his homie. I was with Jesus. But then when it got tight, everybody wanted to know if he was actually Jesus' homie. No, I don't know him. And God took that, and later on, again, we won't be able to go there today, but if you read in the book of Acts, the very beginning of the book of Acts, Acts 2 and 3 in that area, guys, Peter preaches a single sermon. One sermon, one. And after that one sermon, it says 3,000 people got saved. And all 3,000 got baptized. That is incredible, guys. Talk about a forward moment from the failures, right? And so the band can come up. We're going to close here. But the last thing in your notes, guys, we can talk over and over again about failures, but I want to focus forward, right? Let's focus on the forward things in our lives. And so I wrote down each letter of the word forward, and I gave some things you can go off of to talk about, remind yourselves of that word. And so the letter F stands for, surprise, failure. Guys, it happens to all of us. Romans 8 talks about that we all fall short of the glory of God. Right? The letter O stands for own it. Get that mess out and revealed by the fire. Next steps is a good place for that. Right? And the letter R stands for relationship with Jesus. Relationship with Jesus. I shouldn't have to explain why that's important. The letter W stands for work in progress. Work in progress. And one of my life verses, one of my favorite verses in all of Scripture is Philippians 1:6, which basically is Paul writing. He says, I'm assured this, that he who began a good work in you will complete it until Christ comes back. And for me, guys, that's just a great reminder that, you know what, when I do fail, I want to get better, but I know that God is always working on me. I'm standing here today, and God is always still working on me, guys. The letter A stands for accountability. Accountability, and I wrote down seek it, which means go look for it, try to get accountability, and ask for help. Once again, what's a good place for that? Next steps, right? Letter R stands for remind, as in remind yourself of where you were, where you are now, and where you're going. I'm convinced that countless times as Peter was doing his thing after Jesus had told him, feed my sheep, I feel like Peter oftentimes probably would have told himself, man, Jesus wants me to feed his sheep. I gotta feed his sheep. I gotta feed his sheep. Jesus wants me to feed his sheep. I can't deny him again. And that stuff led him to preaching that sermon that saved the 3,000 people. Right? And the last letter, guys, is D. And that means depend on Jesus. Because, guys, we can always, always, always depend on Jesus. So today I'm reminding you that we can trust the fall, knowing that when we do that, Jesus is there with his arms stretched out to bring us in, to hold us and love us and exchange those things for purpose and calling. Let's pray together. Dear God, we thank you so much for who you are. We thank you for your word, for these scriptures that we get to go through, and for the lives of people like Peter who remind us that in life we will fail, in life we will mess up and make mistakes, but also in this life you've given us your son Jesus, who reminds us of who we are, reminds us of the purpose and calling in our lives. And so, God, we thank you again just for who you are and what you've done here today, God. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.